you think you're so smart. Yes, you think you know it all. But the game you're trying to play can be played another way. Can't you see that?
If you think you're so smart, dear listener, why are you listening to this show? This is the WMBriggs show. Our subject today is intelligence. Are we smart enough to figure out what it is? Let's see.
I brought you to the city. Now you tell me there's no room for pity.
Well, since we're talking about intelligence, everybody, why don't we start with an alleged expert on the subject, and we'll see what he has to say, and we'll go from there. Here is an expert.
Some people think that intelligence is the crowning achievement of evolution. Well, if that's true, there should be more intelligent creatures on the planet Earth, but to the best of our knowledge, we're the only ones. So you come to the rather astounding conclusion that intelligence is not really necessary, that Mother Nature has done perfectly well with non-intelligent creatures for millions of years, and that we as intelligent creatures are the new kid on the block. We are 98.5% genetically equivalent to a chimpanzee. Only a handful of genes separate us from the chimps, and yet we live twice as long, and we have thousands of words in our vocabulary. Chimps can have maybe just a few hundred. And we've isolated many of those genes that separate us from the chimpanzees.
That's Michio Kaku on the evolution of intelligence, getting some things right and some things wrong. What's true is, not to the best of our knowledge, to our exact knowledge, there's nothing like humans, which we'll again emphasize in a moment. The other difference, the other thing he hints at there is the difference in genes, numbers of genes between apes and us. Well, the number of genes difference may only be one. Suppose it is only one. And then that would account for the vast difference we see between us and apes. The number of genes, you're always hearing these comparative studies, are not intrinsically interesting in themselves. It's what those genes do in conjunction with the other genes in the body and with the environment. That's what's important, not the absolute difference. It's very easy to be misled on these sort of things. But Kaku is right about one thing. Intelligence, which I'm about to define for you, is not really needed. We see this all over the world, except for humans. Nothing else is intelligent in the way we are. Therefore, it doesn't seem to be necessary for life to go on. Well, the clearest difference that we do notice by mankind, that man notices about mankind, instantly recognized by everybody, even Kaku in his statement there, is that animals aren't people, although people are animals. We're completely different than any other animal that exists, and you listening to this podcast is proof of that enough. The next most obvious contrast is that men aren't women. Everybody can tell the difference between the sexes, though in the West, people are working hard against that as they possibly can. After that comes race, which at a minimum are the differential features which everybody knows and sees. Fourth is intelligence. Everybody knows some people are smarter than others. Now, all four distinct, banal, scientific, biological, undeniable facts are under Orwellian attack these days because why? Because none of these truths share an accord with equality theory. Now, we already talked about equality in another podcast, which you can have a link at the show, either in the show notes for today or at the podcast and videos link in the upper left-hand corner of the site. Our subject today is intelligence, and we'll only skirt lightly over equality. So, what is it? What is intelligence? We need to understand what we're talking about here. Intelligence, human intelligence, is the ability to reason and to comprehend. And comprehending is what separates us from the animals. Intellection describes the acts of apprehension and comprehension and reasoning. And none of these are precisely the same. So we're dealing with a complex thing, intelligence. There are different ways to comprehend. Intelligence is not simple. Now take inductive reasoning. This is one of the things that we do for intelligence, inductive reasoning. And there are at least 5 different ways of inductive reasoning. Let's take the highest one. Let's quote the philosopher Louis Groark. Induction intellection, quote, operates through infallible exercise of nous, of the intellect, through the activity of intellection, understanding, comprehension, insight, end quote. It produces, quote, abstraction of necessary concepts, definitions, essences, necessary attributes, first principles, natural facts, moral principles, end quote. So we're dealing with a very high level of reasoning, not reasoning, but intellection. In this way, induction is a superior form of intelligence than mere deduction, which is something, almost mechanical. You could do deduction on a mindless computer, and I do mean the word mindless quite literally. Induction intellection is instantaneous learning. It proceeds by flashes of insight, how we grasp universals. Now, how this happens is a question I'm not going to answer today. That it happens is indubitable. Intellection inductions, the ones that we have, they're not found in the slogging labor of mechanically working out consequences of accepted premises, like deductive reasoning is. As, for instance, found in working through a well-delineated mathematical problem, such as you might get on a college test or something. Well, I don't know if they still do math in college these days. Those things will have to come postgraduate degrees now, I guess. So one can be facile at figuring, but can finding fresh forays in philosophy futile. Do you follow me? Now, unpacking that statement it requires high intelligence that is not possessed by animals. The level of metaphors packed into that little bit of poetry, if you like, is difficult to follow. So that requires some sort of intelligence. And just understanding what that sentence means proves what I mean, that it's indubitable that we are intelligent. Now, I don't want to in any way confuse everybody what I mean by intelligence, multifaceted intelligence, with the so-called theories of multiple intelligence, which have a pop psychology flavor of them. I don't mean that. I mean to say intelligence is a thing and not many things. It is a thing, if you like this analogy, in just the same way that the painting of the Last Supper is a thing. This masterpiece is not some simple univariate thing. It cannot be broken down into multiple paintings, for instance. We must take it as a whole, although there's a lot going on there. The subject is important because the most common way to quantify And who said we had to do that anyway? Who said we had to quantify intelligence? Well, that's the modern way. The modern way is in science must be quantified, but we overreach and end up in scientism by over-quantifying things that can't be quantified. Anyway, but the way to quantify intelligence, many think, is the IQ test, the intelligence quotient test. And this produces one number. Because, though, intelligence isn't singular, even if the test hit precisely what it was aiming at, which nobody really believes, or at least I don't think many people believe, one number can't capture all there is to know about intelligence. It would be like saying the Last Supper has a painting quotient of 162, which, of course, then sounds absurd. Well, what do we know about IQs? What do we know about anything? Why don't we ask Sam Cooke, see what he thinks?
Don't know much about history. Don't know much biology. Don't know much about a science book. Don't know much about the French I took. But I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be. Don't know much about geography. Don't know much trigonometry. Don't know much about algebra.
Well, there's Mr. Cooke doing a service for us, proving that intelligence is not everything that we need to know. That is to say, intelligence is not everything that we need to have, at least a high intelligence, to get on with our lives. So the IQ test is only going to be a partial indicator, as we'll see, of somebody's value. Now, we need to think about these IQ tests. Unambiguously, IQ tests measure how well one can take the sort of test IQ tests are. That's a tautology, but it's true. Beyond that, though, what? Ask yourself this. Is a person with a measured IQ score of 141 smarter than another person with a score of 140? Well, yes, but only if the IQ test measures intelligence perfectly and the persons taking the test were doing their utmost. Well, a lazy genius might not be persuaded to concentrate on such a dull assignment. Plus, I don't think anybody claims IQ tests perfectly measure intelligence. Insisting on rankings via differences of only a few points, unless the purposes of ranking is some contest where people line up to take a test, in an organized way, is not reliable. IQ tests, though, do measure intelligence to some degree. For instance, we can say conclusively that, all things equal, a man scoring 180 is more intelligent than a man scoring 60. There's always the possibility, the second man shirked or a mistake was made in scoring or whatever, but absent any eccentricity, the higher scoring man will do better at crosswords, calculations, and cognitions than the low-scoring man. Well, that brings up 2 points of interest. The relative difference between scores and capabilities versus intelligence. Some of the relative difference we already dealt with, insisting that a few points difference in an IQ score has very little meaning. And Sam Cooke dealt with a little bit of the capabilities. And capabilities I'll talk more about in a moment. First, though, another remark on the quantification of intelligence. Well, as we said just a few minutes ago, it can't be done. Not wholly. To think we can devise an intelligence yardstick that captures all essentials of intelligence is hubristic. We can create a tape which captures large features of intelligence, though. IQ tests give useful information. This is proven by all the things intelligence is associated with and the positive correlation, I use that word in its plain English sense, with IQ score. So intelligence is associated, activities in which we know intelligence is required are correlated with IQ scores. That merely tells us that IQ scores gives us some information. So, for instance, chess grandmasters are seen to have large IQ scores. Particle physicists, professional mathematicians, analytical philosophers are seen to have large IQ scores. On the other hand, the ethnic studies majors, and there's a nice little link for you, and activists for hire have low IQ scores. It's these empirical results that prove the IQ test has value in measuring intelligence. Why? Well, because these professions or avocations either require or don't need intelligence, and we can just see these correlations. Other empirical measures like income are more ambiguous. After all, a Beatles fan can win the lottery and become rich. Confusion has arisen over the way IQ tests are quantified. This is a little bit of a technical subject here. I won't go too deep into this, but I'm going to put out a little bit of caution for us. Normal distributions are used in IQ scores, which is an unfortunate choice. Nothing in the world or the universe is normally distributed, and so neither are IQ scores. The danger of reification is real and common. Notice that most say, he has an IQ of X, and not, he has an IQ score of X. The score in the former is reified into intelligence itself. This is, it can be a little harm when speaking in generalities. There's not much harm done, but it leads to mistakes, and sometimes terrible mistakes, when thinking about cause. And this is a very important subject because some things, certainly an enormous number of things, biology plus environment, caused a person to have the intelligence he does. His intelligence, in turn, plus other things, like breakfasts, fatigue, desire, and on, caused his IQ score. The causal path from intelligence to IQ score is long and tortuous. Normal distributions have nothing to do with any of this. What normal distributions can do is to crudely, and only crudely, quantify our uncertainty in the score of a man or a group. If all, now pay attention to that word, everybody, I mean it. If all you know is the uncertainty in the IQ score of a certain man or group, is to be quantified with a normal distribution, with a given or assumed central and spread parameter, then you can make statements like this. Here's a complicated statement. Keep it going now. That man is of group G. Therefore, using the normal specified for group G, he has an X% chance of having an IQ score larger than Y. Well, the accuracy of X will be greater or lesser depending on how well the normal was measured and on X and Y themselves and, on whether one is handling the uncertainty in the parameters properly, which few do. Now, even given these caveats, there is some accuracy in quantifying the uncertainty in IQ scores, which again we know via empirical verification. That's the probability statement I just gave, and this is an example of what is known as a stereotype. And because that stereotype has validity, it proves stereotypes have validity and are rational. Sorry about that. It's true. Of course, once you meet the man, or even test him, the stereotype and the normal distributions goes out the window, which should only be obvious. Now, because once we meet the man, anything can happen to him, as B.B. King will tell us.
Woman makes you stupid, every man's a hound. She say love's an ocean, then she pulls you in the drown. Woman makes you stupid, always playing with your head. Next time you be smiling is the day you wake up dead.
So There's many things that can happen to an intelligent man to make him dumber than he actually is. Anyway, it's dangerous. This is why it's dangerous and foolhardy to judge a man based on his group after you have taken his measure in every sense of that phrase. You can't hold on to the stereotype after you've taken observations, but before you've taken observations, you can. So this is why it's sane and rational to judge a man by his group before you have met him. And it's also why it makes eminent sense to make predictions of groups of unmet men. For instance, suppose our probability model, which again is all IQ scores applied to groups R, says, given two groups, G and H, and given the normals specifying their IQ scores, uncertainty in the IQ scores, and also given the correlation between IQ score and, say, passing this particular test, there is an X% chance more men from Group G will pass than Group H. It's a very complicated statement, but the statement is perfectly correct, and it's the way all these sorts of statements should be given. They're not usually given in this fashion, and this is where over-certainty creeps in. Anyway, swap passing a test for having a high income in some cases, or becoming a surgeon, or becoming a CEO, or inventing a new protein, or proves a theorem, or whatever intellectual activity that you like, and you get the idea. Of course, since most people aren't careful with modeling, the results are usually exaggerated, like I said, but not so much that the IQ scores are useless. So back to our two men of IQ scores of 180 and 60. The high man, of course, is all things equal more intelligent than the low. But it could be that the low man is happier, stronger, handsomer, likable, more intuitive in social situations. He may have better eyesight and be less prone to disease and perhaps be more fertile. The second man may exceed the first in any number of capabilities not related to intelligence, or rather to the causes of intelligence of these other abilities. So intelligence isn't everything, or the autistic who have a sort of fearsome intelligence would be our leaders, and the highly intelligent would be having a heck of a lot more offspring than they do. That maybe high intelligence is itself a causal detriment to fertility is discussed and plausible. For instance, this pretty young thing will have no trouble finding a mate. Let's listen to her.
Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our children.
Well, you can't say better. Now, that was a contestant of a beauty contest given some world peas question. But as I say, she'll have absolutely no difficulty finding a mate and reproducing, I don't think. Now, suppose, dear listener, that you're more intelligent than I. Does that make you better? Superior to me, I mean. Well, yes, it does. Partly. In the component of intelligence, by assumption, you have more of it. Therefore, you're superior to me. Is being intelligent better, though? Well, that's an entirely different question. You're better than I at tasks which require intelligence, so you're likely to be better. We can't discount luck. And therefore, you're to be preferred when intelligence teams choose their sides. Incidentally, have you noticed the only times when saying someone is smarter than another doesn't hurt someone's feelings is when the person being compared against is obviously unapproachably ahead? You're allowed to say we're not as smart as Einstein, for instance. Anyway, never mind that. You're smarter, but are you a better person? Well, better in the sense that you should be accorded more dignity in being human? Certainly not. The fear, then, this is important because the fear that many have is if it really is true that Group G, a recognizable real class of humans, has lower average intelligence than Group H, in the sense that, given our measurements, any H man has 50% plus probability of being more intelligent than any G man, then if the peoples of both groups realize this, disharmony will result. This is why some lie about differences in intelligence in order to forestall this conflict. The comparisons, I must insist, are always before the individuals themselves are measured. The lying works, of course, as all propaganda does, at least in some ways. It convinces people of mediocre intelligence to believe in the so-called blank theory of intelligence, which holds everybody could come to the same point in intellectual ability if each person were given sufficient resources. Never has there been a belief more misaligned with observation, though. This even beats global warming for error. Nobody knows, however, how much biology and how much of environment are the ultimate cause of any given man's intelligence. There's definitive evidence both are important, but there's no evidence that we can ignore one. So, in some groups, in some countries, scores tend to improve, which have areas of improving infrastructure. But the scores don't improve forever. Just as a man born with a certain muscle mass exists, can only get so strong with ideal training, a man born with a certain biology can only get so smart with ideal education. So, a consequence of being highly intelligent is not to know what it is like to be of low intelligence, and vice versa. A person of very high intelligence will be able to characterize a low intelligence person, and vice versa, but neither will be able to understand what it's like to be the other person. This has deep implications. Let's listen to Uncle Fred on this. People of IQ 130, notice his reification there, people of IQ of 130 and up tend to assume unconsciously that you could do anything just by doing it. If they wanted to learn Sanskrit, they would get a textbook and go for it. It would take time and effort, but the outcome would never be in doubt. Yes, of course, they understand that some people are smarter than others, but they often seem not to grasp how much smarter or what the consequences are. A large part of the population can't learn much of anything. Not won't. Can't. Displaced auto workers cannot be retrained as IT professionals. Now, this is unpalatable and judgmental, but it's true. Well, how did it happen? Well, cognitive stratification is the term people are using. The highly intelligent marry one another and produce progeny that are intelligent, and vice versa. Intelligence is surely partially heritable, and so are conducive environments, to speak loosely. And the interests and professions of the highly intelligent can and do differ from those of low intelligence. And so that further exacerbates or amplifies the stratification. Well, there can be deep and important cultural and economic consequences of this, obviously. There is no reason, I think, to foresee an eventual Eloy-Morlock divide where the brightest sink into the mire around Washington, D.C., and only emerge at night to feed on those in flyover country. Or wait, maybe it can happen. I don't know. That's it for this week. See you next time when we discuss Lucky You.
How come you ain't rich? You claim to have picked every horse that won, 'cause you know just which is which. Yes, if you're so smart, tell me how come you ain't rich? Henry built a Ford and made his pile. Woolworth used his 5 and 10. Rockefeller's wealth came from Standard Oil, and Waterman's came from a pen. You claim it all came from consulting you. Isn't that a brand new switch? If you're so smart, how come you ain't rich?